Let's move on to the next file we're going to test. It's called time.ts. We'll start testing this file from the function called today. It has a very simple implementation, and all it does is it returns newly created date object which corresponds to the current date. Just like we have done several times before, let's create new file with tests called time.test.ts. Firstly, let's import function it from the Vitest library and describe our first testing scenario. So we're going to test the function which is supposed to return the current date. Then there is another pretty similar function to the first one called tomorrow. And as you may have guessed, this function returns date of tomorrow. Let's mention this fact in the second scenario. It gets date of tomorrow. The next function is called end of hour. And what this function is doing is it returns that same date, but the hour will be incremented by 1. Let's say the current time is 8:30 p.m. Then passing this date to this function is going to return the date which corresponds to 9 p.m. The next function is also pretty simple. It allows us to determine whether the past date is today. So we're going to verify that this function also behaves as expected. It checks if past date is today. And finally, the last function in this file is called 2seconds. And this is basically a conversion function, so it simply converts amount of milliseconds into amount of seconds. And now that we have defined all testing scenarios in this file, let's start writing implementation for the first testing scenario. It gets current date. So let's prepare all necessary data we need to test the function. We'll create date object with any date. And in the third part of the test, where we usually write our expectations, we'll call function today that we are testing, and we expect that this function will return previously defined date. But of course, it's going to fail right now because the current date is different. And we can't actually rely on the current date in our tests, because depending on when we're going to execute the test, current date will always be different. But we always have to keep our tests predictable. And sure enough, if we're going to execute our test now, we'll see differences in dates. So to test functions that depend on the date and time, Vitest provides us with a way to specify system time. So basically we can mock system time to set this time to whatever date we wish. And we are mocking the current date and time by calling setSystemTime method on the VI object. Let's just import this object up above and check the test again. This time it has passed. So what actually happened here is this. Before calling setSystemTime, if we're gonna create dates, anytime we're going to get new date object, even if only milliseconds or seconds are different. But to make it more clear, I'm going to implement fake delay by using promises. So let's just create new promise, and then by using setTimeout call, we can defer this promise to be resolved in 2 seconds, like so. And since we have used await inside of this function, we also have to specify async in front of it. And now let's use this fake delay in between these console log statements. And just to wait less, let's use 1 second instead of 2. And there we go. As you can see, every date has different amount of seconds because we have used 1 second delay in between every console log statement. But watch what happens if we're going to call setSystemTime before any of these console log statements. Let's see what happens with the date objects. And interestingly enough, we have the same date object printed 4 times. And the test has passed. That is because we have set SystemTime to be equal to the date stored inside date constant, which is why this expectation has passed. Alright, now let's do the following. I'm going to create 3 different date objects and call them date A, date B, and date C. And I am just picking these dates randomly. So first of all, we're going to mock system time and assign date A to be the current date and time, and then we'll check if the function today is going to return this date. Then we're gonna do the same with the second date, date B, followed by expectation that function today is going to return new current date, which corresponds to the date stored inside date B constant. And the same thing we're going to do with the third date, date C. And there we go, everything has passed. By the way, we don't need this async keyword in front of this function, since this function doesn't have any asynchronous calls. And also let's remove this only modifier, so that we don't forget to check all tests at the end of the lesson. Another important thing is that whenever we are mocking system time, at the end of the test, we actually have to restore the original current date. And we're doing this by calling useRealTimers method on the VI object. Because if one test sets different current time, all other tests will also be affected, because we are modifying global state by setting new current time. So if we wouldn't call useRealTimers, today function call would return the last mocked date that we have set in the test. But if we'll call useRealTimers, then the function is going to return proper current date, which is correct in my case. And at the end, let's run all tests in the project. All of them are passing, so we can move on to the next lesson.